In this video, I want to give you some advice about how you might want to approach and complete Journal 2. Now, Journal 1 was basically just an introduction to how to write about your user experience. And for me, Journal 1 was just basically a warm-up activity. So Journal 2 is actually would be considered much more complex and more difficult. So I would advise you to think carefully and reflect carefully about what is happening when you complete your Journal 2. Okay, and also Journal 1, a lot of you also wrote it very much like how you wrote it for the Fundamentals of Interaction Design, just describing the step-by-step what you did and also the design principles and how you felt, but it wasn't kind of very connected throughout. And I didn't get quite a good sense of the experience of use. You do talk about the experience, but most of you talk about it in terms of negative or positive, not really identifying the experience. So I thought I better give you a bit more behind the scene advice about Journal 2 before you start doing this. Okay, so now the focus of Journal 2, I've made it a lot clearer than what I did before, so I hope you get the latest document from Canvas. The focus I want you to think about in this human-computer interaction in Journal 2 is that you want to make a Zoom call with your webcam on. So you will show yourself on video and other people can see you. And this will be with a group of your classmates, and so I would say at least 2 others. So you and 2 others, the minimum. It could be more, but the minimum is actually 3 people having a Zoom call together. And probably from this subject. Look, you don't really need to, but maybe everyone else can be doing the data collection at the same time while you're doing this together. So the aim of this Zoom call is to share and learn about each other's commuting experiences, or you can also use it to share your current design ideas that you're thinking about so far. What exactly the content is that you are doing with each other on this Zoom meeting is not that important, but what's important is that you get to share screen. So you get to use the technology, use the Zoom technology to take turns to share screen with each other. So I want you to be able to write about the user experience of sharing your screen and also looking at other people's shared screen. You also want to record the meeting. So knowing that you're recording the meeting and that you're actually recording the meeting would, number one, give you some data to look back and see, help you maybe write down what it was that you experienced. But also, while you're recording, how the fact that you're recording could maybe impact your user experience. So you can see this use of Zoom to do this activity is far more complicated than Duolingo. Okay, so the task we want you to do is actually to write about your user experience of using the different aspects of Zoom. So using the Zoom and the video on to chat, to talk to people, as well as to share screen and to record. Okay, remember what the tool is, because it would include the different technologies that you need to make this Zoom call. Right. Now, as I said before, the human-computer interaction here, so me and using the technologies and different technologies, is very different from you using a phone and the internet to use Duolingo. Because not only that the activity, it's very different, because this is about yourself just doing this on your own. But this time the activity is conducted with others. And you need to think about, and I can't give you the answer, but I want you to think about, hinting at you, to think about how the activity is conducted. Not just what is involved, but also who is involved. Okay? And the what would include technologies as well. So, given that, it is not appropriate or feasible to report the step-by-step of what you did, like what you wrote down for Duolingo. Okay? Because that's not relevant. And also, if you report step by step of what you did in a Zoom meeting. You'll be talking about what he said, what she said, what I said, and that's not what it's going to tell us about your user experience. So when I look back at my Zoom experience, I think it's best that we report it as phases of interaction. Okay, so we really have in a template a pre-interaction phase. Okay, so that's the phase prior to the start of the meeting. Then we could have maybe a phase one. So maybe phase one could be about making the call, connecting, and starting to do the chat and describing what happened during the chat. Okay, not so much the details of the conversation, but what happened during the chat and what the user experiences of the chat. That's all you need to do. And then you move on to the next phase. So maybe the next phase is about doing a screen sharing of your own to share something. And how did you find the user experience of that? And sharing the screen. And then also talk about maybe the user experience of looking at other people sharing the screen. What was it like? Okay. And is there maybe a phase three? Maybe there's a phase in which you talk about, what happened after the meeting. Okay. Did you look at the video itself, the recording itself? How did it make you feel when you look back and thought back about the meeting on Zoom? So I hope you remember and take this advice that in the different phases, and I'm not saying there's only going to be 3 phases, it's really up to you to define the different phases, because those are the focus of the different human-computer interaction that you did in this Zoom meeting. Okay, so how many phases depends on how you want to structure it. We're not interested in the content of what you said, but we're much more interested in how you felt while you are screen sharing, while you are watching other people's screen, how you felt while you're chatting to people on Zoom, looking at them on the video, and knowing that you're being looked at on the video. We're interested in how you feel knowing that it is recorded. Okay? So Journal 2 will gauge if you can describe the experience of chatting using this video platform. And more importantly, something that not all of you did very well in Journal 1 is to explain why and how some of the factors affected your experience, as well as why and how these factors affected your experience more strongly than other factors. Basically, what I'm saying is that in Journal 1, we noticed that while it is important to write about each of the factors and how it affected your experience, we want you now to identify some of the factors that were more strongly involved than others. So not all factors are the same. It really does depend on the activity. It depends on what is going on. So in this activity, we want you to identify some of the stronger factors that were involved and spend more time talking about them. Yes, you need to fill in the answers for all the factors in the template, but we also want you to spend more time expanding and explaining and how and why that particular factors you think affected your user experience much more strongly than others. So secondly, we also want to gauge whether you can describe your experience of sharing and reading shared screen using this video platform. And again, the same thing, explain why and how specific factors affected your experiences and why these experiences affected your experience more strongly than other factors. So throughout, we just want to know in the factor section, not just how each factor affected you, but in particular, what factors were the strongest and had the most major influence. And we want to read more about your thoughts. I'm just trying to forward my slide, and I think that's all this. But there is one more slide here, which is not being shown, sorry. So the final slide is actually about phases. Sorry, I'm not thinking carefully. The final thing I want to show you is actually the template. So I've actually reconfigured this template slightly to help you do this journal more closely to what we're hoping that you can report. So like in pre-interaction, we expect a lot more here to be written, okay? Because it's not just what you did first and why, but who was involved. Explaining about people and your familiarity with them. It's very important because that affects your user experience. And I'm not going to tell you how and what happened, but telling us who the people are and the relationship they have to you, how well do you know them, how many times they've had Zoom meetings with them before, would be very important. How did you organize this meeting? Who initiated the call for the Zoom meeting? Did you receive it? Did someone call it? Okay. And as for the unfolding interactions over time, we want you to look at, here you go, the phase one. Okay. So phase one talks about what were the first phase that you think that you want to talk about, and you describe the actions, the cognitive observations, and the feelings here. And phase two and phase three, and more phases if you want. Okay, you can delete the boxes as necessary. And this is a part also where you describe the factors and explain the factors. Okay, so here I've included familiarity with people. Okay, so this is where you actually explain how what you wrote in the pre-interaction has affected your experience of this Zoom meeting itself. Okay, and there are different things that are involved, and I want you to think carefully which ones were the strongest in affecting you. And I've altered section D and E slightly from Journal 1. In part D, we're more interested in asking you to say, well, at the end of this meeting, what did you think was the main user experience? We want you to name it. We don't want you to say whether it was positive or negative. We want you to give it a name. Okay? I'm not going to give you the answer because it really depends what your experience is. You know, is it joy? And if it's so, explain your choice. Why did you say joy? Now, this should be linked very carefully to what we've read earlier on in your journal. And part E, instead of asking you to give us a suggestions for improvement, we want to then look back at your factors and say which factor has the strongest impact and why. So list them and explain. So I hope, together with what your tutor is going to tell you in your tutorial this week, with this advice video, you'll be able to better complete your journal too. But the most important thing is seriously think and reflect on the experience and how many different angles and facets of the experience is, and really how deep the experience can be, and what are the different factors that are particularly important in shaping your user experience of a Zoom call.